Hi, I'm Randy Reid, editor of the Edison Report, and we are here for the NLB's 11th Annual Lighting Forum. We're joined today by Dan Blitzer, principal, the Practical Lighting Workshop, and he's representing the Nuckolls Fund, Kevin Hauser, professor at Oregon State University, and Bob Davis, scholar in residence and director of professional lighting education for the University of Colorado Boulder, as well as Adjoint Professor of Engineering for Tennessee State University. The name of this panel is The Importance of Lighting Educational Grants. And Dan, the first question goes to you. Why do people and organizations support lighting education financially?
Well, I should really ask that question of you, Randy, all the way through, but I think people do it for a variety of reasons. The one that seems most meaningful is they've enjoyed or are enjoying a career in lighting that means a lot to them as a way to earn a living, as a way to work with other people in a constructive fashion, and they'd like to give back. And supporting education is a way to not only give back to the industry, but give back in a future-oriented fashion. It's certainly the case that companies also look to their image and the value of it. And there are others who simply believe that education in itself, and in education in lighting in particular, is so important that it deserves something that they can do for it. And the easiest thing to do, frankly, is to provide money. Much easier than providing time, as I think everybody recognizes.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. And I will say that I sure agree with that. It is easier to provide money in this day and time. Kevin, how do we balance traditional lighting education with incorporating interdisciplinary aspects like IoT, data analysis, AI, and sustainability?
Yeah, sure, Randy. So I think it's a great question to think about, where fundamentals of lighting, where maybe the technical foundations or the design foundations fit into a curriculum when we think also of the future and how the lighting industry is changing and how we might be incorporating new ideology, new technologies, new learning, new understanding. So I think, at root, I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all approach to all different educational institutions. And of course, lighting is quite varied. Some people get a lighting education through theater, others through engineering, which I'm affiliated with an engineering program, others through architecture or interior design. And each of these different institutions and different programs have their different sets of priorities and criteria. I always think about the education I'm doing in lighting as being in support of architectural engineering. So I'm applying an architectural engineering mindset to lighting design and applied illuminating engineering. And so in our context, something like, IoT might be actually maybe more relevant or highly relevant in comparison to a program that may have less technical foundations associated with them. So I think it's that sort of discipline-specific knowledge that we can think about how new material is going to be overlaid on current curriculums and how to balance that given the time that's available to devote to lighting and other topics.
Bob, the next one is for you. What are the most significant needs supporting university lighting education programs in the future?
Wow, that's a big one. I think as Kevin mentioned, there's so much variety in lighting education. And, Kevin and I represent universities, so I'm going to limit my comments to university-based lighting education. I think, in some of the programs, particularly in the engineering programs, most of the faculty are also active with research programs. And so, their needs are different than those that are really just focused on the instructional aspects. So I'd say in all cases, it always helps to have good support for students. And so student scholarships are always highly valued. I know in some of the work I've been doing at Tennessee State, for example, the local IES chapter was able to provide a scholarship for someone for studying lighting at Tennessee State. And that was kind of a carrot, right? It was linked to them choosing to take an elective class in lighting to be eligible for that scholarship. And so that type of, direct support to students is really important. The Colorado program is a little unusual in the engineering programs in that for most of its history, including the years when I was there full time with David DeLaura, both of us were not tenure track faculty. We were instructional faculty. And what that means is that there's not as much money available to support travel, for example. There's not as much money available for conferences. And so that's where some of the external funding that the university gets can really help the faculty to, in their own professional development, to be able to do some of those other activities that may or may not be supported. And Kevin might tell you he has the same struggles. Even research active faculty, often there's not a lot of money for some of those other activities. And so I think those types of grants are really helpful. And I guess the other thing I'd highlight with the Nuckolls Fund, with my experience with the Nuckolls Fund, is that ability to attract some funding to start something new at the university can be really important. For a faculty member to be able to get a grant to provide some summer support so they can work on new curriculum material. And not only important financially for the faculty, but the other thing for being in lighting such a small discipline, I think the visibility that brings to the program within the university hierarchy, is really important. At Tennessee State, for example, that the Nuckolls Fund grant to Tennessee State immediately got the attention of the Dean of Engineering, right? That they now knew there was this new thing going on at the university. And so I think, there's a lot of different aspects to that. And I think they're all important. I wouldn't want to pick any one of those as the most important. But I think in general, for people to understand that, lighting as a discipline, as important as it is to us in the industry, and as important as those programs are, oftentimes in their institutions, they're pretty small. They don't have a lot of visibility, and anytime there's external funding comes in, that certainly helps those programs to gain some stature within their own university.
Kevin, do you want to jump in here?
I'd love to. So I love Bob's response, but I want to extend a couple things. And in a way, I want to reframe the question slightly to focus on the incredible strengths that university programs bring to lighting education and the opportunities that we have for collaboration with industry. So, I believe that universities are well positioned as a catalyst for change because we're not just responding to industry needs, but we're actually shaping the future through the professionals that we educate and mentor as our students have become entry-level professionals. So I think, one of a university's potential greatest strengths is our ability to leverage resources and partnerships so that we can create impact. So, in fact, I'd like to share a current example, if that's okay. So, we've recently at Oregon State, we've secured a fairly sizable Department of Education grant that will support 10 PhD fellowships focused on sustainable high-performance buildings and infrastructure. Lighting being one piece of that, but it's broader than only lighting. But in this case, the Department of Education, they committed $1.3+ million. And that's a federal commitment, but we have to match that commitment with about $330,000 of our own money. And so, the question is, where does this additional match come from? Our university has committed about $120,000 or thereabouts in terms of tuition support, demonstrating the university's investment in the vision, but that still leaves a gap of about $75,000 a year over a 3-year period to essentially provide fellowship support to these PhD students that would be studying this way. So I think this is a situation where we can look at a federal government, a university commitment, and we're trying now to raise the gap that we need in order to fill this out so that we can go forward with this fellowship program. But it's a situation really where every dollar contributed unlocks the federal and the university money toward what are ultimately our shared goals. And, the other thing in this case is our program is emphasizing recruitment from underrepresented groups that are traditionally underrepresented in engineering education. And so we're targeting at least half the fellows to come from underrepresented backgrounds. So we're trying to help build the diverse workforce that industry is seeking. And, I think there is good alignment between university objectives and corporate objectives in that way. So I guess, coming back, rather than only focusing on needs, which I think it's really important to kind of do a gap analysis, how can institutions like the Nuckolls Fund or the Beazle Fund or the ILD Education Trust, how can they support lighting education? But in addition to that gap analysis, I think it's actually exciting to me to think about how we can build on our respective strengths and create opportunities that benefit all of us.
Well, you mentioned the diverse workforce that the industry is seeking, and I would just add, and the industry needs. We really need this, so that is great to hear. Now, Bob, I want to come back to you because you mentioned Dr. David DeLaura, and I've recently learned about I believe it is a faculty fellowship fund named after Dave DeLaura. Tell our audience a little bit about that.
Sure. Yeah, I'd be glad to. And if you don't know me in the audience, I was on the full-time faculty at CU Boulder for 9 years from the late 90s up to 2007. And David had been there for decades at that point. But in 2007, both David and I, for different reasons, decided to leave the university to go to industry. But David had been there, as I said, for I think 30 or 40 years at that point and had a strong alumni base of folks who had been there. And so for the lighting faculty that were coming in to replace us, a number of alumni put together an effort in David's name to establish, I'll call it an endowment. In the university, endowments can range in size. So this was a small endowment. But the point of the fund, so the David DeLaura Faculty Fellowship Fund, and Sandra Vasquez, who many in our audience probably know, Sandra's been full-time faculty at Boulder ever since David and I left, actually. But she kind of holds that fellowship. And basically, as an endowment, all the donations that came in, typically from alumni, and folks like Cheryl English and Teal Brogdon and Don Kinderdick, some very senior alums of the program, senior in terms of stature in the industry and in their companies, led that effort to do some fundraising for that. And so now, Sandra, in her kind of operating budget for the lighting activities, gets the proceeds off of that endowment every year. So she gets a certain amount of money that she can spend to take students to the ILD conference if she wants to do that, or so she can invest in her own professional development, or do things like they often take students away for a weekend retreat with outside industry speakers. And so that, that endowment fund has created that sort of ongoing stream of funds that can directly support the lighting education program there.
Okay. Dan, next question goes to you. How does the Nuckolls Fund balance financial support for institutions, teachers, and students?
Well, I was going to add, because I thought Bob and Kevin might be too modest, my view, speaking personally, that the most important aspect of your question are the teachers. And I think anybody who thinks about his or her own educational experience will recognize the incredible value from great teachers, and with sadness, the lack of it from those who weren't so great. So in thinking about where we would like to put the donors' money, we look at who the principal investigators are. In other words, who's going to put a program together, who's going to select students for scholarships. Those are really critical issues for us. We try to find a balance between schools that have no program and need one. That's, by the way, all schools that don't have a program need one. But schools that have a program and feel that they could do much more if they had resources to enhance the classes that they have or add an additional one, elective or required. And also student scholarships. Student scholarships are challenging. For a funding organization like the Nuckolls Fund, we would have no real hope of effectively selecting students who should receive scholarship assistance. So we rely on the leaders of lighting programs to make those decisions. And that only relieves us of a burden we could not properly bear, but we put the problems on somebody else's shoulders altogether of, so to speak, finding one deserving person and not being able to reward several others who might be comparably deserving. We are also going to revive, through our efforts, the Teachers of Lighting Workshop, which is an effort organized by the IES and others that seeks to improve the knowledge and teaching skills of people engaged in teaching lighting, not frankly at the university levels, such as Kevin and Bob, but in, I think, this very much underserved area of interior design and, believe it or not, architecture. Just aren't enough people teaching effectively in those areas. So that's a fourth element for us to juggle among all the others.
So
I should add that we have a board of 10 people. And so when it comes to balancing, we're able to bring in diverse points of view, diverse experiences, diverse geographies, and that helps us, I think, come up with a good balance.
I would absolutely agree with that.
Given that you're one of them.
Well, I do think we have a very good group and various backgrounds, and I think that's important. Leads me to my next question. What is the role of lighting professionals in supporting the next generation of professionals?
I'd like to respond initially with an anecdote that's very fresh in my mind. I was part of a panel on a lighting class in an architecture school on the subject of sustainability. And afterwards, there was a chat about education. And the story that came out was that the most significant education in lighting education in this educator's life came from other lighting professionals. In other words, the apprenticeship system, for want of a better word, that a committed and passionate lighting professional has an outsized influence. You might think of it as somebody who relates to somebody one-on-one. Of course, Jim Nuckolls related to whole groups of people, and one of the reasons the fund is named for him. But in this particular case, it was a one-on-one and then passed on to a series of other people. And that sense of the role of the professional as an educator outside of formal education can't be overlooked. I think it's absolutely critical. And of course, the Nuckolls Fund receives donations from practicing professionals every year and has since its very outset. So people contribute both in terms of money, but very much in terms of time and passion.
Okay, so Dan, you've talked about apprenticeships. So Bob and Kevin, this one goes to you. Trade schools. Should we look at things beyond what we look at? Trade schools, high school, construction management, electronics, that sort of thing.
I'll defer to Kevin first.
Well, I was involved in high school outreach at my previous institution, where I developed a program called Project Candle. Candle is an acronym for Collaborative Alliance to Nurture Design and Lighting Education. And Candle supported PhD students, bachelor degree students, and then we did high school outreach. So we were trying to do this kind of cross-cutting at different levels. For the high school outreach, even though Project Candle was rooted at Penn State, we had 5 different universities that were involved in our high school outreach program. And those universities were basically recruiting within their local high schools to try to recruit into their university programs. And it was, what I would say is it was a qualified success. And by that, I mean, when we were able to get university students studying lighting into high schools to teach to high school math classes or science classes or theater classes or whatever it might be at that local high school, there would almost inevitably always be connections that were made. And that a couple of years later, as those students would graduate from high school, previously lighting wasn't on their radar as being a career path, and they could see somebody just a few years older than them, a high school junior or a college junior or college senior, and they can sort of view themselves along that career path. That said, it was an extremely heavy lift. So it's a really massive time commitment. And if you want to compensate people for the effort involved in doing that, it's a significant effort, and so ultimately, even though we did that high school outreach program for several years, we decided to stop doing that after a number of years and use those resources for other purposes. So, I share that experience because I think if there is a commitment of time and money and effort, we can recruit from high school. But we ultimately felt that probably the more effective recruiting would be in freshman seminars for students that were already on campus, that we could then draw into our engineering programs and emphasize lighting as a career path there.
Bob?
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. Kevin, before I was reading my mind, I was aware of Project Candle and was involved with it early on, and know that that was a big part of why Kevin was doing Project Candle. And I agree with Kevin wholeheartedly. I mean, I think there's a lot of work being done at most major universities in STEM outreach, science, technology, engineering, and math, and sometimes with arts in there, STEAM, to try to make sure that good students in the local high schools, think about those types of career disciplines. And lighting, it seems like lighting should be a great one, right? Because it's so visual, it's hands-on. Students should really gravitate towards it. And a lot of them will gravitate towards engineering because of that. But I'm my own personal passion has never been in that realm. I highly respect the people that are doing that type of work. But as Kevin mentions, it's a ton of investment of time and emotion to try to see the results. And oftentimes, if the goal is just to get folks to choose those career paths generally, I think they're pretty worthwhile for that. But to say we're going to get a lot of people coming into lighting for that, I'm not sure that's the best place for, at least for me. What I've found useful, and you mentioned the title Director of Professional Lighting Education. My role at CU Boulder now, I don't work with students on campus at all. I don't even live in Boulder. I'm in Portland, Oregon. But I deliver programs for people that are in the profession. And I think, Randy, as you went through your list, thinking about trade schools and that, what's been interesting for me to see, in our programs, we try to make sure we can accommodate someone that's an electrical distributor. We have a lot of people from the rep agencies and from design firms, from manufacturers. But these are folks now that didn't go to school for lighting. Something got their spark, and they decided they were interested in lighting, but quickly recognized they really needed, to get up to speed with it. And I think there's a lot of room for that. For new, we have so many people that come into the industry that didn't come from a traditional university program. And for me, one of the things that excites me about that program, as Kevin sort of hinted at too, was, it's sort of an alternative pipeline for people to join the industry. And so people that aren't traditionally represented in our industry are already out there working in other jobs, perhaps, and get interested in lighting and can come into it that way. But I think the idea of getting to the community colleges and that, those can have big impacts broadly. But I think the hope that could be a major pipeline of new people coming into lighting, I'm not sure that's realistic.
Two thoughts
Dan?
before you move to the next one. First one is, historically, high school students involved in theater at the high school level are an important feeder source for architectural lighting. And maybe that's a way to promote this career. Not that we want to take people out of theater, but theater has, I think, fewer opportunities perhaps than professionally than architectural lighting. The other one was for many years when I was working at the Phillips Lighting Application Center, we had a class from local high school come in, and this was a program in mentorship for inner city high school kids across several different grades. And the person who founded the program, Cy Meyerson, who had been at Parsons and been in the lighting industry, chose lighting as a field to engage students for all the reasons that Bob said. It deals with people. It deals with technology. It's visual. It's relatively small, meaning you have an opportunity to enter the industry at a variety of levels and scale and make an impact relatively early in your working life. And it was very, very successful for him. And whether the model can be replicated, essentially saying, don't think about recruiting and lighting, think about what a 15 or 16-year-old is thinking about. And can lighting be an example, in this case, how do I become an entrepreneur? How do I get out of my current career prospects, which might be employment in a relatively low-grade job, and do something more interesting, more challenging, and believe in myself and develop the responsibilities that an after-school program, because that's what this was, they all committed their time, can give me in a way that maybe other programs can't.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. If I can add to that, Randy, because I like what Dan shared there, and I don't want to, Kevin and I to be too much the wet blanket. I think when we're at a major university, you're kind of responsible in our cases for the whole state. And they want you to see you doing things throughout the state. I think on a local level, I mean, for professionals to get involved locally in their local communities and high schools and try to do things, that's great. And I'll give a shout out to the folks in LA right now. I know there's a number of lighting designers who are partnering with the local chapter of the National Organization of Minority Architects, NOMA, and they're getting out into high schools, with the folks from that chapter, specifically to try to attract minority students to come to college to study these things. And so that, I think on a local level, if you can get into your high school and give talks about lighting, that can really help. I think it's just when you try to organize that on a broader scale, from a university standpoint, it gets to be bogged down pretty quickly.
Well, on a personal note, I'd be very interested in learning more about that program in Los Angeles, and perhaps we could write an article and get more exposure and, plant that seed in other communities as well. Okay, Kevin, closing comments.
Actually, I want to build on something that Dan had talked about before. You mentioned before the Nuckolls Fund investment in lighting educators. And, when we're talking about how to recruit and how to expand lighting education and the impact of lighting education, I really believe in that. But I also think that, thinking about the future lighting educators is also highly relevant. And so at many institutions like where I work at Oregon State, for example, to become a tenure line faculty member and to essentially embed lighting into the curriculum, the person's going to have a combination of research and teaching responsibilities because we are a research intensive university. And what that by default means is that person's going to be required to have a PhD. And so I do think there's an opportunity for the lighting philanthropic community and lighting industry to have a long-term view on how to support not just current lighting educators, but future lighting educators through research projects that lead to PhDs, identifying students that want to have a career as educators. I mean, even if we take the current institution I'm at, Oregon State, half dozen years ago or so, they decided they wanted to have an architectural engineering program. Lighting wasn't on the radar for Oregon State University. It was architectural engineering. And so when I came here, I was hired not to be a lighting person, but to be an architectural engineer while still maintaining my disciplinary focus in applied lighting. And, through the influence I was able to have here, we hired another faculty member in lighting, and we're well on the way to embedding lighting within an architectural engineering program so that I hope it will have a lasting impact well after I'm gone. And I think thinking in a multi-decade view, thought process here, rather than what can we do next year, but what can we do over the next decade, I would encourage some thought about how we can support future lighting educators. And thank you, Randy, for the opportunity to chat with you about today.
Well, I guess I could say the Nuckolls Fund is waiting for a proposal from an institution that is interested in cultivating the next generation of lighting educators. It's not a new idea to the Nuckolls Fund, but it's not been one that we've been able to find enough interest in the institutional community yet that they want to do that. But maybe, as you observed, Kevin, a grant of the scale that we can do, which is not, as state universities go, frankly, more than a cupful. But maybe that's enough to, if you will, roll into larger interest and a statement, oh, this is something worth doing all the way through. And we would be very happy to entertain those kinds of proposals.
Okay. Bob, closing comment?
Oh, I just want to say thanks for the Nuckolls Fund, to the Nuckolls Fund and to the Beasel Fund and the folks who over the years have been providing this type of support. It's been a really important part of my career, and I'm really grateful for it. And I guess for those in the industry, to Kevin's point about future educators, you may be surprised to find out that there's lighting education happening at universities in your town that, they're not turning out graduates perhaps, but as we've mentioned here, most theater programs have a lighting course, interior design programs have a lighting course, and so I'd say really try to, find out who's teaching lighting in your town now. There probably is someone already doing it, and see how you can help them with that.
Okay, very good. Dan?
Randy, can I have one? I'm going to be
Yes, you may.
fired
Last word.
if I don't make this last comment. People who are listening to this have heard from two outstanding lighting educators, truly, truly outstanding lighting educators who had a major impact. I hope that that inspires you to contribute, whether you contribute directly to the university, contribute through a fund like the Beasel Fund, contribute through the Nuckolls Fund, but contribute. Put your stake in the ground that this is something truly important and something you can do, and then do it. And thank you very much, Randy.
Well said. Thank you all.